Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Predictably, this front row is empty, as if I'd call on anybody. We will have some time at the back end for you and your questions and your observations, so don't lose heart about that. Our topic today is sports gambling. What's going on, what will go on now that the Supreme Court has spoken. We have a panel. From a moderator's point of view, it's a terrible panel. They're all lawyers. So they may be very boring. I don't know. Lawyers tend to be boring. What's interesting from your perspective, since I assume that some of you are interested in sports, possibly interested in a sports career. These 5 people have integrated their legal education with sports in highly successful ways. Derek, tell us about yourself. How'd you get to the sports end of the spectrum?
Really by accident. I had no desire necessarily to be in sports, but I had a good friend who worked for the National Football League and was leaving the league to go work for the Jaguars and called me up and said, would you be interested in coming back to New York and working for the NFL? And I said, sure. And that's how I ended up in the NFL.
You make it seem so obvious.
No.
Who wouldn't want to work for the NFL?
Yeah. It was a great opportunity. At the time, I was working for the NCAA. I'm what they call a boomerang employee. I worked for the NCAA as a young investigator and then came back a number of years later. But sports is very much a profession about relationships and who you know. You have to be competent, but contacts are really important.
So now you're with the NCAA.
That's correct.
Yeah. You've left out your tour with the FBI.
Yes, I began my career as a special agent with the FBI in New York, right after I graduated from law school, and so I spent 5 years in the New York office here.
Well, you're proof of the proposition that life is fortuitous. You move along, and who knows. Ari, how about you?
Yeah, my story is not that different, really. I don't want to presume too much, but my law school days are the closest to where I am now on this panel. So I worked at a firm in New York for a few years and wanted to get into something smaller and something a little more in line with the passions that I have, sports being one of them, and had connected with some people at FanDuel. It was an emerging industry, one that I'm sure you're all aware has some significant legal touch points. So it was a very interesting company to get involved with. And just, again, fortuitous, right place, right time.
Rick?
Same general idea, although I think closer to what you started with, Arthur, in terms of marrying an existing interest in sports. I'm going to open the sports page first pretty much every morning, no matter what, with the happenstance of being a lawyer, after leaving law school, considering environmental law as something that I'd be interested in, and also sports law. Was fortunate to work at a law firm in Washington, D.C. that represented the National Football League and the National Hockey League, and did some work for those clients and got to meet people at other leagues. In 1993, moved and took a job at the NBA, and that's 25 years ago, and I'm still there.
Do you actually read sports pages? You read the newspaper?
I said that for your benefit. I don't really know.
He treats me as an old fogey. It's funny, you read it first.
Yes.
I read it last. It's like icing on a cake. I save it. You know, I go past the obits, and then I get to the sports page. Jody?
So I'm on a panel here with a couple of old friends. I just want to mention Derek and I were both employed by the NFL at the same time, worked together. And while I was at the NFL, Rick was one of our outside lawyers. But my story is very similar to Rick's. I started out at a firm. My exit strategy was to find a job in sports. I did. I moved on to the NFL. Spent 13 years there, and now I'm in academia teaching, among other things, sports law, both here and at Brooklyn Law School.
David?
Like everybody else, it seems like you just fell into this. My background is that I was appointed by Governor Christie after being on his staff for a few years to work on Atlantic City reform efforts. For those who don't know, in New Jersey, Atlantic City is the only area you can engage in casino gambling. Lo and behold, New Jersey decides to have a sports wagering law. We passed it through Constitution. We have a law that gets promulgated by us in 2012. Requires regulations to be drafted by the Division of Gaming Enforcement, which I'm in charge of. And I was very happy to do that, but I was hoping that the leagues might get an injunction long before I had to get that work done. They did not.
Sorry.
I know. And we were days from starting legalized gambling under the first law when the injunction came in, and therefore it's NCAA versus Christie. I'm second, Reebok, and the rest is history as we go through.
Okay, to bring everyone up to speed, our panel really begins, life in a sense begins with that decision last made by the Supreme Court in what's denominated, I guess, NCAA, Murphy?
Murphy.
It's Murphy versus NCAA. In 2 or 3 minutes, state the case, Jody.
So this is a case,
I've
by the way,
always
that-
wanted to do that to a law professor.
Exactly. This is a case that David spent 10 years of his life litigating, so I almost feel that it's something you might know a little bit more about than I do. But I just want to point out, because of a question a student asked me in my sports law class last week, I just want to make sure everybody knows that before PASPA was passed in 1992, my student asked me, well, so what was it like back then when all the states had gambling? So that's not what it was like. This is a country that for 100 years, for the most part, had no legalized sports wagering and very little legalized gambling. In fact, the only state that had a full-fledged sports book before the 1992 law, and mostly since then, was Nevada. And there are a handful of other states that use sports wagering as a basis for lotteries or other revenue-generating activities. And PASPA was passed in 1992 largely as a result of lobbying by the sports leagues and the NCAA to protect the integrity of the game. And it basically said that states who currently had any form of sports wagering were grandfathered. Every other state had 1 year to pass a sports wagering legislation, and then you're out of luck. There will be no legalized sports gambling in the United States other than in those jurisdictions. At the end of the day, you had 4 jurisdictions that allowed some sort of wagering, and a lot of states with what I would call buyer's remorse or legislator's remorse, like New Jersey, for example, that decided after the fact, after the deadlines had passed, gee, sports gambling would be a good way to revitalize Atlantic City. It would be a good way to generate state revenues. We should be entitled to engage in this form of commerce because it's traditionally been within the state's police powers. And there's something about PASPA that doesn't fit the constitutional structure that regulates the balance of power between the states and the feds. And so they brought this lawsuit. It took them up and down the federal courts 3 times to finally get to the Supreme Court. And last year, under a doctrine known as the anti-commandeering doctrine, the Supreme Court decided PASPA was in fact unconstitutional, head to toe, opened up the floodgates for every state now to reconsider and perhaps finally introduce sports wagering.
Now, anti-commandeering, basically,
2 minutes?
Yes, 2 minutes. That was awesome.
basically, under the 10th Amendment, the court felt the federal government could not commandeer, could not direct state legislation, and that's the way the court read it with 2 dissents and 1 partial dissent. You were in the courtroom that day, weren't you, Rick? I think I heard.
Yes, I was, along with others. Yes.
I mean, it's one of those situations, those of you who are going to be litigators, you lose, you lose, you lose. District judge, panel of the Third Circuit en banc, basically enforced the statute.
Yeah.
Supreme Court of the United States, basically 6.5 to 2.5.
Right.
threw it out.
We have more judges than them if you total them all up. If you add all of them over the course of 5 years, ultimately, we had more. But it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
When you
Doesn't
lose at the end, it only matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one anecdote I told earlier today was the interesting thing about the case. I was asked after the argument by someone who wasn't there what was discussed about sports gambling and what the justices said about sports gambling, and the answer was nothing, because the entire argument was about a very abstruse doctrine of constitutional law called anti-commandeering, and there were 3 cases or 4 that have ever been decided by the Supreme Court that relate to anti-commandeering, one of which has to do with bearer bonds. And so my response to the person who asked was, they said the justices said nothing about sports gambling, but if you want to hear about bearer bonds, I can tell you all about that, because they talked a lot about bearer bonds.
Did you predict the result?
I predicted the result. It's one of those ones where you can reasonably read where the justices were coming out. They were pretty, they telegraphed their views fairly directly, and so if I had placed a wager, I would have won.
Can I ask Rick something?
Yeah.
So the NBA was one of the defenders of PASPA, right?
Yes.
They were one of the parties that wanted to preserve a federal regime in which states could not legalize sports gambling. But about a year or so prior to this outcome, or maybe it was 2 years, your commissioner took a very different stance, and yet you still pursued the case. I always wondered about that.
Well, I would say a couple things. First of all, we had been in the litigation for quite a while. As was stated, it went up and down several times from the district court to the Third Circuit, and we didn't feel like it was appropriate to drop out of the lawsuit at a later point. Secondly, our view was and remains that the way to deal with sports gambling is on a uniform national basis through a federal law that that regulates it, so that, at least from the vantage point of our league, and I think other leagues, and maybe even the NCAA, that we're focused on one set of rules and regulations, and it can be the same everywhere. We felt that in order to get to that place, we'd be better off preserving the existing federal law and then working through Congress to replace it, as opposed to what ultimately happened, which was striking down the federal law and then seeing what would happen in Congress, which so far has been nothing, and I would wager that it will be nothing for quite a while, and now sort of dealing with it in 50 separate states, which is what we're doing.
So, Derek, why was the NCAA involved?
Well, I think very easily, the NCAA has had a long-standing opposition to sports wagering, and it's just consistent with the philosophy of our membership. The association, they don't believe it's in the best interest of collegiate athletics or the welfare of student athletes, and so that's been the NCAA's long-standing position. The court's decision in no way changed our policies, so it's still a prohibition for any student athlete, for myself, for a coach, administrator, to engage in any sports wagering where the NCAA sponsors a national championship.
I love it when you NCAA guys speak of the student athlete as if he or she exists.
We believe they do.
Belief is a wonderful thing. Now, David, were you in the courtroom when the
Yes,
case
I
was
was also
argued?
there, and I came to the same conclusion that Rick did very early on, and the first thing we did when we returned to New Jersey was pulled all the casino leadership together and said 3 things to them. 1, we're going to win this case. 2, the state of New Jersey is going to roll out sports wagering immediately after we win the case and have a new law passed, because we need a new law passed. Therefore, you need to be ready. You need to be ready by doing 3 things. Start your construction plans now for building your sports book. 2, pick your partners, because for people who don't understand sports wagering, casinos and racetracks do not engage in sports wagering. They have partnerships with companies that are experts in that from throughout the world that run the sports wagering for them. Pick your partners, get them into the state, and we have to vet them to make sure they're not tied to organized crime. And the last thing is, we told them, get yourself a good lobbyist, because the legislature, when they get a hold of this, They're going to twist it all over the place before the law becomes operational in New Jersey. And then sure enough, we won the case in May 14th, and Governor Murphy, to his word, signed the law 4 weeks later, and on his desk, which he demanded of us, were the regulations to implement sports wagering immediately, and we banned sports wagering 3 days later.
Why was New Jersey so pathological about this? I mean, the case originally was Christie, right?
Correct.
Governor Christie becomes Governor Murphy. And you guys are losing. Yet you say we're going to win this case.
Well, we did two things that worked in our favor. One, if anybody knows about state governments, people get a little annoyed when you're spending millions of dollars on a case which people think you're going to lose. So behind the scenes, Governor Christie and the administration came to me to go to the casinos, and we went to the casinos and said, to the racetracks too, you're a fee-funded organization, which means you pay us to regulate you. Therefore, you're paying for the entire litigation costs. We didn't have to worry about taxpayer monies funding the litigation. The second thing that we did beyond that was you had some extremely strong personalities in our legislature and with our governor, and when they think they are right, they're going to run to the end and fight you all the way. So the force of will with people like Ray Lesniak, a state senator, the president of the Senate, Steve Sweeney, Governor Christie, Governor Murphy, you know, he's the closer that brings this to finalization, but they just didn't, they felt we had the right case, and we were gonna fight it to the end, and we got lucky.
Ari, were you just an idle bystander as this was going on?
Yeah, it sounds like I was the only one not in the courtroom. But FanDuel traditionally is a fantasy sports company. We had an interest in this case, obviously, given the direction we've gone now. But for us, the NBA, NCAA, state of New Jersey, these were the real stakeholders in it. Our observation was purely from a speculative commercial standpoint, in that since New Jersey's gone online with sports wagering, soon after the case was decided, our company was acquired by Paddy Power Betfair, which is one of the largest worldwide operators. They obviously saw the value in having a well-known national brand that has millions of registered users who are avid sports fans. And so, and as you've seen the success that both us and DraftKings have experienced in the market to begin, it was an obviously good thing for our business, and one thing that we kept a close eye on.
So what actually has New Jersey done? What's legal in New Jersey?
Well, for those who ride the trains, which I just rode in from New Jersey today, if you don't know that you can gamble online through DraftKings, you must be blind. Every ad on every billboard coming into Manhattan talks about DraftKings and FanDuel and being able to gamble online. But what we have done is very simple. We now have 8 operations, what I call retail, bricks and mortar operations in the state, 2 racetracks, 6 casinos. We have 8 mobile wagering sites. FanDuel, DraftKings are 2, there's 6 others. We have a lot more in queue. I expect there'll be 2 more casinos that will come up in live, and probably another half dozen mobile sites. We have some of the largest international mobile sites coming in. Sports wagering, you have to understand, is in a worldwide setting, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. United States, infancy stage. Europe, it's a way of life, and it has been for probably 20 years on mobile, and 100 years in England from the sports books that they run. So there will be massive expansion. What New Jersey is doing now, we feel like we're the poster child for other states. We feel very nervous. I just came back from Nevada. There's at least a half a dozen states that are ready to strike in 2019 after the midterm elections. Because if anybody, your politicians in the audience, nobody wants to talk about sports wagering before they're elected. After they get elected, they're going to move quickly. So the Midwest, look out.
So if I get this straight, there are 6 casinos and 2 racetracks, and I can wager there.
Correct.
And I can wager online.
Correct.
And what does New Jersey get out of this?
Oh, we get revenue, of course. But the big argument right now on how to.
Oh, you pass over that so quickly.
No. This
get
is
what,
This
8.5?
is all commerce. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. The federal government receives a tax today. The federal government, who opposed us in sports wagering, is taxing sports wagering, gets about 5% of the gross gaming revenue tax. State of New Jersey, we get a lot more. We get an 8.5 plus another 1.25 kicker for the locals, plus the mobile side, we tax a little higher just because we can get more money from them, because there's more money wagered mobilely than there is online than there is on site. And the third group, the operators, they make a lot of money. They basically make 5% of what's the handle. Handle is how much is wagered, 5% is gross gaming revenue. And the last group of this partnership is the leagues. They want to monetize a direct monetization somehow to assist their corporate interests. And there's a lot of debate on that. Rick can talk about the the NBA, what they're asking for in their model legislation. And so yes, 4 groups, they're all getting a piece of the pie.
And what is it you're asking for, Rick? Since the NBA is still among the more aggressive of the leagues.
So we were fairly early into the effort to get model legislation put forward for states to consider who are interested in legalizing sports gambling. We have a model bill that we have been working with legislators on ever since May, actually before May, because I came back from the argument in December and said, we're going down, so let's get out there. And so we were out there in January with what we thought made sense. And look, it starts from the proposition that that the sports gambling that we're all talking about is happening by virtue of the product that our league produces and other leagues produce and the NCAA produces. And in just speaking for the NBA, that's an enterprise that costs us in excess of $7 billion a year to produce the games and the competition that's out there. And so our view is that this isn't a deck of cards. It's not a piece of green felt that is easily rolled out. It's something that costs a tremendous amount of money to produce. And if someone is then going to go and earn money on wagering on those games, that we ought to at least be part of that as a royalty for the intellectual property and for the effort and expense that we put in. Secondarily, there's going to be and is ongoing in my office quite a bit of additional effort around integrity, standing up an integrity unit that's more robust than we've had before, hiring more people, and having platforms for analyzing a lot of data. There's a fair amount of expense associated with that. That also is a justification for having some amount of this money come back to us. And then the third point is just is the risk factor when there's a gambling scandal. If there's a gambling scandal that relates to our games, I don't think that the gambling operators are really, depending on the facts, of course, and what exactly we're talking about, but I think the leagues are the ones that bear the risk of that issue. And so for all of those reasons, what we have said, we started out in our model legislation with a 1% royalty fee off of the handle, which means the amount bet on the contests. And in discussions with the operators, discussions with the states, the place we are now is on a 0.25% fee, which we think is very reasonable and something that can be easily handled by the operators.
Are you still trying to get federal legislation? It's a misnomer to say that the Murphy case legalized sports gambling. It didn't. What could Congress do
That's
at
correct.
this point?
Well, look, the main issue in the court, again, just not spending too much time there, but in lay terms, the problem was that the federal government passed a law that said that sports gambling is illegal and then left it up to the states to essentially enforce that. And that's not fair or right. You can't commandeer the apparatus of state governments to enforce federal policy. So what the federal government could have done, maybe should have done back in a world where they were trying to ban sports gambling, was to create some office of gambling enforcement, of creating some apparatus that would actually enforce that law and put resources behind it, which they didn't do. They left that all to the states to handle. So we certainly think that the federal government could adopt a set of regulations here that would require the kinds of integrity provisions that we're looking for in state-by-state legislation that would provide consumer protections, which is part of what we're going to the states for, and that would create a regulatory framework around this. Now, there's a ton of expertise in the states. A gentleman who has got a ton of it is sitting down at the end here, and I'm not, I'm not sitting here saying that I think the federal government could do it better than he does it. I don't believe that for a second. My main issue is what I'd like to do is nominate him for the federal job so that he could then go and run the whole thing, and I wouldn't have to.
No, not going to happen.
I wouldn't.
Donald Trump and me, I don't think.
No, I understand. You know what?
I'd be
There may
fired
be
in 2
it
weeks.
may be an opportunity in a couple of years. Just take the long view. Take the long view here, okay? So, but I mean, the point is, I'd love to have professionals who have that experience, but doing it on 50 states. We're going to get a bunch of different approaches to this. We're going to get a bunch of different ways it's going to happen, and it's going to be very difficult for the leagues to deal in that environment.
In many ways, I share a lot of the statements made here with regards to integrity. I mean, when you look at the model legislation the NBA is providing, there's two components. One is clearly how can they benefit with a commercial interest and a direct monetization that doesn't exist today. 8 states have legalized sports wagering. None have given them any direct financial benefits.
But hope springs eternal.
Yes, right. But the second part of their legislation I would agree with, and that is how we begin to work together to share information to reduce the risk of match fixing. Because match fixing is real. We have a whole history through illegal sports wagering where there have been terrible situations of match fixing. And we need to find ways to work together. And the only way we can do that is by working with some of the ideas they have, negotiate, put behind us the adversarial relationships, which were real, and now move forward. And there's 2 areas they've asked for that we kind of disagree with, but we'll negotiate with them. And that is, one of the factors they asked for is absolute veto power over any event that's going to be gambled on. We're not going to give them absolute veto power, but we are given a mechanism. We got to communicate because they have information that we need where they can come to us and say, as a state, we're very suspicious about this event. Can you pull it off the board? Absolutely. We have full authority to pull anything off the board at any point in time. The second thing is they've asked for unimpeded access to all gaming data. Unimpeded access to the entire record of everybody who's ever gambled on any event for whatever reason. Very suspicious of that request. However, there is a desire to work together with them, and there should be a mechanism where they get access to all the data that we have that allows them to deal with integrity issues associated with an event or something that's unusual or suspicious, or they can talk to us and say, something about tonight's Knicks game, not really happy about that. Could you pull the records on everybody that's gambling on that, and we can analyze it. We'll work with them on that.
So just since I know this will live forever on the internet in the world where there is no right to be forgotten anymore, and because I'm a lawyer, I will only say that a couple of those descriptions were not actually what we're asking for, but that's fine. We're asking for a more limited set of data from people. We don't need to see every single thing. It can be anonymous, et cetera. But generally speaking, I would say that we are trying to work with states, and we share common interests on integrity. We share common interests on consumer protection, trying to figure that out. We differ on whether the leagues should be able to receive any compensation for this at all.
So I would just point out that there's a useful blueprint for how the federal government might regulate, and even how the states might regulate, in a statement that our Senator Chuck Schumer put out over the summer after the Murphy decision came down. Protecting the Games We Love After Murphy, a federal framework for consumer protection and sports integrity. And it covers a lot of the issues that were just raised. It's basically a three-part statement which prioritizes protecting young people and people who suffer from gambling addiction, protecting the integrity of the game, and protecting consumers. And a key point which bears repeating is that information exchange and coordination amongst the various stakeholders is essential for avoiding match fixing. And that's what goes on in Europe. I don't know if any of you follow European sports, but there have been scandal after scandal in cricket, rugby, soccer, tennis, you name it. There's actually a European-based newsletter called Law in Sport, which gives a bi-monthly, this is how frequently it's happening, bi-monthly, they report on all the latest match fixing and what's known as spot fixing scandals, and it's nonstop. Now, I'm not sure that the reason they're aware of so much integrity threats to their games is because gambling is legalized. There is the argument that the situation is worse when gambling is illegal, we just don't know about it. And that legalized gambling generates the data that allows us to make the connections, put the puzzle pieces together, and find the integrity threats. But the fact is that those are very real, and that the European model is a useful one in designing how we avoid those threats in the United States.
If I were a gambler, this is purely hypothetical, and prized my privacy, I'd rather gamble illegally and be anonymous than have these two data freaks know everything about me. Ari, do you have this problem with fantasy?
I'll let Ari answer, but only to the point. Again, I wouldn't get into the weeds here, but I'm not interested in knowing your name in this hypothetical world in which you gamble. This very unusually strained hypothetical that you are.
Rick is a former student of mine and is now getting even.
Payback's a bitch. So in this world of hypothetical gambling, and I'll recite your social security number now, I don't want to know any personal details. I just need, what I'm interested is in anonymized stuff that would allow us to see trends. So we'd see a spike in interest on a certain thing, not necessarily that you're doing it particularly.
And I think we'll have a system in play for that. And they should have access when needed, but we're not going to give it to them up front. The data elements that we're talking about are hundreds of thousands of wagers. Even in New Jersey now, we had a $186 million handle in the month of September. 110 million was through the internet or mobile. The transactions are massive, and that doesn't include the illegal sites that the professor, I'm sorry I have to call you that, was talking about. We have law enforcement reports to me. We've identified 108 illegal websites that are currently operational in the United States. Every state they're operational in, every state. And we monitor them. Why can we monitor them? They're right on the internet. Check your phone now. How can you place a bet in the state of New Jersey? First site on Google that pops up, myBookieLive.lv. It's illegal. You can go, create an account, gamble on that, probably in a minute, 2 minutes, and you can start wagering. And you have complete non-privacy protection because no one's going to ever find out about you.
But we'd prefer you go to New Jersey and wager on FanDuel.
Yes.
As for the privacy thing, I think, look, I have friends who've said the same thing to me. Why? I have a bookie. Why don't I just go to him? I won't get a tax return. I think this is an emerging market, and one of our duties as a new operator in that market is to provide a fun and also a safe place. And I know that sounds a bit cliche, but the truth is, as a regulated entity, you have consumer obligations to hold up to. And if you as a user run into an issue with a bookie, like, good luck. I don't think it's someone you particularly want to chase after to get your money if they're not paying you out. Us, on the other hand, you know who we are, you know our brand, and you know our regulator. And so if FanDuel does something that you feel wrongs you, you have an avenue to raise it. And I trust that Director Reebok will let us know about it. That doesn't exist if you're operating in the black market.
And Derek, as you listen to this, all this talk about money here and there and match fixing, do you have confidence now that you can probably bet on college sports, at casinos, racetracks, online? Are you particularly worried since you deal with the first A in PASPA, amateur?
It is a significant concern of the NCAA, and after the court ruled in Murphy, our president appointed an internal task force within our office to really do a top-to-bottom review of sports wagering issues and the impact on the NCAA and collegiate athletics. There was some discussion about whether there were opportunities for member institutions, the NCAA conferences, to monetize this. There's no support in our membership for that. At this point, I think the areas they really focused on really are, we need to make sure we continue to do efforts to educate our student athletes. We do a lot of education with them now. They have an annual certification they have to attest to that they have not participated in any form of sports wagering, but they're a young and oftentimes vulnerable population, and so we have to continue to educate, because even though it's legal, they still can't participate in it as a student athlete. I can't participate in it. Anyone else in America can, but they cannot. I think the things that concern us, not just about the ability to wage, but confidential information they have access to about their teammates. My alma mater is the University of Alabama. There's a lot of interest in whether our quarterback will play this weekend and whether he will play going forward. His ability to play impacts the betting line dramatically. So that's another issue we're looking at. We've engaged with a vendor to assist us in integrity services so that we will receive very timely and accurate information if there is significant or suspicious or unusual activity in the betting lines on our games. I think we're going to look at all the sports, but quite honestly, our biggest concern, men's basketball and football. Those are the areas that I think would prevent the greatest challenges. We look at our officiating. Unlike the professional sports leagues, those officials are employees of the National Basketball Association, the NHL, the NFL, and so forth. Ours are independent contractors, so they don't work for the NCAA or our conferences necessarily, but they are independent contractors and engage with their services. So we already do extensive background investigations. Those will be enhanced in many respects. The last area is really looking at what we call information and data management, injury reports, as I alluded to just briefly. We have challenges in that area because they are students, and student records, as you all know, are governed by FERPA. And so when you talk about whether a player will play and the status of his injury or a student athlete, what information can you divulge without violating FERPA? So those are some of the challenges that we're dealing with now. The internal working group is working on and trying to come to some resolution. The last area, as you all may know, we have had a prohibition for years with regard to any of our national championships being played in states that allow sports wagering. And so that has been suspended because of the decision, because essentially now you would take virtually every state that hosts a national championship off the table. So that policy has been suspended, and it will allow our host committees to entertain bids for the Division I men's basketball tournament, the Final Four, to be located in those areas. So those are some of the key issues that we are dealing with now that are really priorities for the association going forward.
Do you have a position with regard to federal legislation?
We do. In fact, our senior executives recently have had some meetings with the Justice Department around a federal framework. We think that's the most effective way to address this, as opposed to having 50 different state laws with regard to sports wagering. So we're hopeful that there will be some federal framework that will put out a consistent policy about sports wagering. So that is something that's very important to the NCAA.
But realistically, you don't think that federal legislation will prohibit wagering on amateur athletic events?
I honestly don't know. I mean, if in a perfect world, we would hope that's the case that will be, but I think it's pretty much understood now the horse is already out of the barn. I think that's the landscape where we're going to be going forward, that sports wagering is acceptable, it's legal, it's regulated, and I think we just have to adjust to that's the environment going forward. Where do we fit in collegiate athletics to make sure that our games stay legit and that our student athletes are not harmed in any way. So I think there's a recognition, this is the reality of where we're going to be in, going forward. How do we coexist in that new environment?
Hey, Derek, I know this is not the topic for the day, but doesn't the fact that there's sports wagering and it's going to happen on NCAA competitions put pressure on the NCAA on the pay-for-play issue? Because now you have college students who are not getting what they think they deserve monetarily, and there are going to be all sorts of external pressures on them, influences, payoffs to affect game outcomes because they're now significant to gambling interests, and maybe paying players, college athletes, a little something reduces the integrity threat.
That's been an argument that's been advocated. In fact, I read an article just this morning on the flight here that advocated that position. I don't know that I necessarily agree with. I think there are always, pressures that our student athletes face, just candidly, especially in revenue-producing sports, football and men's basketball. They see the money that's generated. They're not, blind or naive to it. And we get it in a lot of ways, and I think there are a number of efforts within the association to address those, from looking at our amateurism model in many respects. So I don't necessarily know that if paying student athletes would lessen the likelihood that they could be compromised. I think there could be a case that it would, but I don't know that that's kind of settled at this point.
And I think from my perspective as a regulator and in law enforcement, that the greatest risk we feel for integrity is clearly tied to the lower level funded athlete, whether it be a minor leaguer or a G leaguer in basketball or college athletes. And to put it in perspective so people have facts, the state of Nevada handle last year on sports wagering was $5 billion. The number one sport it was bet on in Nevada were the NCAA football and basketball teams, because they have more games, they have more teams, and people are really interested in gambling on college athletics in the United States, as opposed to, as Jody mentioned, some of the European jurisdictions that really don't have that type of event to wager on in their countries. So, yeah, I lose sleep at night worried about the NCAA. I know Derek has a big job. We need to be engaged deeply in preparing for the risks that are associated with low-paid athletes who may or may not have an opportunity to ever make the next level and will be approached either through bribery, extortion, blackmail, and as Derek mentioned, the greater risk, I call it insider trading. 18-year-old goes up back to his dorm, mentions that the Alabama quarterback, he's not playing this week. Somebody's going to use that information to their advantage to take advantage of financial opportunity. And that insider trading, whether it's negligent or intentional or even grossly negligent, that is a big concern when you have hundreds of amateur athletes who are 18 to 21 and are engaged in a social network that they're in a college and university. So they have a lot of work to do. We're happy to work with them, and we need to look at this in the future, because the last thing we need is a major scandal. We've had them before, mostly in collegiate athletics, and they're high risk.
The low-hanging fruit for the opportunities for corruption is what the Europeans call spot fixing, or what we call proposition bets, prop bets, right? Because it's sort of easy enough to compromise your performance to avoid scoring a touchdown or to fumble the ball in the third quarter when somebody has a prop bet on that. What do you recommend the folks who are closer to the lobbying process right now in terms of avoiding that threat? Are there efforts being made to, for instance, allow wagering on game outcomes but not on prop bets?
Yes. So what? Excuse me. So yeah, that's I'm not going to make that joke. David, in somewhat inflammatory language, said that we were proposing an absolute veto right over types of bets. I wouldn't use that language myself, but I would say that to Jody's question, that's one of the issues that we're focused on. We want to make sure that it's not acceptable to have a prop bet placed on who is going to make the first turnover of the game, or whether the first pitch of a baseball game is going to be a ball or a strike. And the operators have a similar interest in a lot of ways. We're aligned. We want there to be gambling products with integrity that don't lead to perceptions of impropriety or scandals or anything else. But that's precisely for the reason that you're saying, Jody. That's something that we're interested in getting some say-so over, because this whole area is new. The mobile aspect of it is reasonably new. The kinds of bets that are going to be offered, I think, will be creative. There will be lots of new things that nobody has seen before or has thought of before, and we're going to have to be able to respond in real time to those to make sure that we aren't getting into those easily manipulable situations.
And I think
Hasn't that
Rick's
been
on to something
opened
here.
up, in a sense, through fantasy football?
Yeah.
Sorry, repeat the question?
I mean, prop bets, how far away is the prop bet issue from fantasy football, where I can bet on a player?
Right. So fantasy, the key difference there is it's not binary. You're not saying, is Odell going to have over 100.5 yards this week? You're building a roster of 9 different players out of a near infinite amount of possibilities. In terms of of an integrity issue with fantasy, every one of those players is generating points. So it is almost impossible. It's impossible for anyone to throw a game, in a sense, because they're only trying to add to their totals for the day. And given each of them is involved in a team sport, you would require an entire other team working in their favor to allow them to gain a certain amount of yards, and this is just one player you have in a roster of 9 people. So the integrity issue doesn't quite cross over on fantasy. And for the pros, I think if you think of the match fixing things that have happened in the past, it's a different world now in the sports industry, a lot more coverage around it, players make a lot more money. You'd be hard pressed to expect, again, going back to Odell, him intentionally getting over 100 yards. I mean, it seems the Giants, he could do that all on his own, unintentionally at the moment. But I do hear it in the sense of in more amateur and more obscure games, and that's why I view it as somewhat, in working with the regulator, in that the types of bets we offer, we make sure are approved. I don't think we currently take action on Division III European handball. So I do think in the major sports, the opportunity for corruption can largely be crowd sourced in terms of how it's controlled. And again, as Jody pointed out, sports betting exists on a black market and has for a while anyway. And we haven't seen a massive scandal in the United States in the major sports of recent memory.
So I won't be able to make a prop bet on whether Odell has a tantrum this week or not?
That line would be too easy to hit.
Rick, does the league expect, with the opening up that's going on, a lot more wagering? Or is it just a shifting from the illegal to the legal market?
I don't know. I would say it's somewhere in between. I would say we expect more. But part of the problem, of course, is that while there are lots of estimates thrown around as to the size of the black market, there really aren't any studies that I'm aware of, at least, that I would put a whole ton of stock in, principally because it's a black market. So it's pretty hard to put an exact figure on that. So I don't know if we're all working from the same baseline. But look, my expectation throughout has been that if you make an illegal activity legal, that there are some number of people in our society that are law-abiding citizens that where the the circles overlap, and they would like to engage in this activity, but haven't previously simply because it was against the law. So I would think that you would get some additional activity of this kind, yes.
David, you had your head moving when Rick was.
Well, I agree that the illegal market is massive now. I don't know the number either for all the reasons Rick said, but I do know this from what we see online and publicly, as public forums, we know it's very big. And to put a dollar figure on, it's very much uncertain. So we just let the economists predict what it could be. But we also look to Europe, because Europe's been involved in this lot longer. And one of the points Rick mentioned, I would agree with. The in-play wagering, because of technology is driving this marketplace, this business, in ways that many old folks like myself, I don't even understand. I try to learn it every day. But in the United Kingdom, 80%, their records, public records, 80% of the wagers that are made on in-play wagers. That is, once the game begins, there are anywhere from 10 to 100 to 1,000 different activities you can bet on in that one event. Now, the risk there is what Rick said, how far are we going to go in this area? How far are we going to go in this area? Certain sports, and the NBA is not one, because they're very fluid, they have less stoppages, but think of baseball. Baseball, it's methodical, deliberate, so you could easily come up with 100,000 different bets on baseball and know the results publicly watching what happened. And be fairly confident that if you expected Aaron Judge to hit a home run in the first inning and you wanted to wager on it, you'll know the result. Now, if you had Aaron Judge would take a ball for the first pitch, Rick may be on to something. So FanDuel knows. They came to us with a proposition bet one of my first couple weeks on taking bets, and I looked at them and went, you got to be kidding me, because it was Le'Veon Bell. We want to take a bet on Le'Veon Bell when he's going to come back and play football in his sitting out. And I said, no, we're not doing that. We're just getting off the floor, and all I need is Le'Veon Bell to go tweet on his line, hey, I'm coming back tomorrow, I'm going to play in game 3. It's not worth it. So input from the industry, working with the operator, working with us to reduce the risks, definitely necessary. And we'll get there. And we don't need the federal government to help us get there, because we're on the line, they're on the line, the leagues are, and the operators are. And everybody, it's commercial operation. Nobody wants it to fail. We all have a financial stake. Leagues have a major stake beyond finances. It is their livelihood. They lose integrity. Fans get a little conscious about maybe not watching the event anymore. So technology, again, in this area is driving this nation into areas we have never experienced. And so the goal of the operators, they want to have gambling 24/7. They don't want to have it just when the basketball game's on tonight. They want to take bets from Europe, from Asia. Think of horse racing. The federal government authorized under the Interstate Horse Racing Act simulcasting online wagering 15 years ago. Why? To save the horse racing industry. And you can bet on a horse race now in Japan, China, I don't know if they had it, but Malaysia does, and Europe, United States. So you can almost gamble online 24/7 on horse racing. Now, it's a dying industry for other reasons, because your generation is really too interested in horse racing. Some of you maybe, but most of you probably have never been to horse race in your life.
So I think one of the points David just made is that we're in a very disruptive period for sports, especially for professional sports, technology, wagering, new regulatory environment. And when any business faces that kind of disruption, they have to make adjustments. And you do it on all fronts. You lobby for a piece of the pie through regulation, or you change your business model. And I actually have a question for the leagues, is what's the new business model going to look like going forward now that there's sports wagering? If you lose the legislative battles and you're not going to get your VIG from an integrity fee. How are you going to change the business? Are there going to be sports books on site in your arenas? Are you going to partner with organizations like FanDuel? I know there's already some partnering going on. How deep is that going to get?
What? Oh. What's a VIG? She used the word VIG. Does anybody know what that means? I don't know what that means. So
Google
look,
it.
So look, yeah, the answer is, I mean, this thing is a little known fact. If somebody asked me what has been the subject matter that we have spent the most time on in my office in the last 12 months, and I mean in the legal department at the NBA in the last 12 months, and then I think it would, I take it back. I would expand it to be the whole league office in the last 12 months. It would be two things, and outside of this forum, I doubt anybody would guess what they were. The first one is this topic, sports gambling, and the second one is our new NBA 2K league. We now have a fourth league, which is an electronic gaming league. And so to Jody's point about disruption and changes and developments, these are things that we spend a ton of time on. There are so many facets of the gambling issue, so many different areas that we have to look at. It's a little mind-numbing, but one of them obviously is what the commercial landscape is going to look like for us. So we made about 6 weeks ago our first gambling partnership with MGM. MGM is a company that we have done business previously, not in the sportsbook area, but in other areas. They own a WNBA team in one of our leagues. And so MGM is the official gaming partner of the NBA. They have that designation. They, on a non-exclusive basis, have entered into a commercial arrangement with us where they will be receiving our official data, which we think is extremely important for the integrity of betting on our games, and they have agreed commercially to give us a lot of the information that we're seeking, that we have been seeking legislatively. So we are partnering with that operator. We are looking to partner with others and hope to do that soon. And we want to have gold-plated relationships with the very best and most reputable companies in this space. And so we're trying to do that.
And we're supportive of that commercial arrangement. I mean, it's hard to, I understand where the league's coming from with it. We get their position on integrity fees. It's obviously a cut of our handle and our revenue, so as operators, we're not as in favor of it. But we view it as something that should be decided as a commercial relationship. We've, on the fantasy side, worked with the NBA before. We've worked with many NBA teams, many NFL teams, and what the NBA has accomplished with MGM, I'm sure what they'll accomplish with other operators and other leagues will as well, is how we see that it's an arrangement that works for both parties that will allow the industry to be monetized.
Turning from integrity, which the five of you have focused on, what, if anything, is going to be done to protect people against themselves? The youth, the addicted, the poor, in terms of the possible side effects of gambling.
I would mention that Senator Schumer's proposal includes bans on gambling advertising, especially where it targets youth populations. And that if you examine the Australia experience with legalized gambling, and there it is absolutely pervasive. I mean, there's every type of gambling, including sports gambling, in your local 7-Eleven. And they've found that the failure to regulate advertising and exposure to youth has created a culture that has so normalized gambling that has actually hurt youth sports there tremendously, and they're trying to roll it back a little bit. And I would just hope that we as a nation get ahead of that for precisely the reasons you're suggesting.
Well, we did in tobacco. It's very interesting that the major tobacco settlement stopped Joe Camel as an advertising tool and stopped advertising about smoking to young people. But now what about gambling? Because it's not restricted to youth. The vulnerable are ageless. Even old people have a problem.
You touch upon something that's very important in the entire gambling industry. All three of those issues you've mentioned are critical to every state that has legalized gambling today, not just casino gambling. The audience should understand 48 states right now have legalized gambling of some sort in the United States. Only 2 states do not. One surprises everybody, Hawaii. Second, probably is no surprise, is the state of Utah. I've publicly stated that the state of Utah is no longer out of the box. And they authorized FanDuel, DraftKings, fantasy sports to be played by their citizens. Some would argue fantasy sports is not gambling, but I guess Utah feels that it's not and can be protected through consumer protection laws. But to answer your question, this matter of underage gambling, truth in advertising laws, consumer protection laws, the responsible gaming community, which is trying to help those who are addicted. It's a mental health issue. It's clearly identified as such. Are real big issues in this country. And with the explosion of sports wagering, it's going to be bigger. And what protocols, safeguards are going to be built in, and what treatment and assistance is going to be given to those who will struggle. And we're not ready. And as a state, we're trying to do the best we can, but this is a widespread program that goes beyond state lines. I'm less concerned with the underage when it comes to mobile. I can assure you that the safeguards built in on trying to enter into an account, it's not like you're signing up to open an account at Amazon. You have no privacy when you open up a gambling account in the state of New Jersey. We know exactly who you are. We know exactly where you live. We know your social security number. We do a credit check on you. We know so much about you. I wouldn't go online and gamble if you want some privacy. We know where you're gambling from. We have geolocation devices that if you want to right now try to get into the state of New Jersey, we can pinpoint that you're in this building trying to get in the state of New Jersey on a gambling app. You will be denied. Go ahead, try it. You will be denied. But what you can do, and what we did in New Jersey, because we want to have the business succeed, you can create an account. You can fund your account from here. You just, when you flip the switch to gamble on one of the sports sites or one of the other sites, you'll be blocked. So,
David, that is the most anti-tourism message I have ever heard.
I was
I
going to
get
say,
it.
we don't
those
want to...
casinos will not be happy with me, FanDuel will not, but
signing you up
the
as a
reality is,
spokesperson
in this
anytime soon.
generation that I'm looking at, you all have a cell phone, and you are engaged, as anybody is in the United States, on the internet and mobile devices.
I guess I've taken my last trip to MetLife Stadium. Okay, we promised we would come to you. Questions, comments? Sir? Wait, we got to get a mic to you so that you can be reported to New Jersey.
I was wondering, with the talk of these massive data sets, what's the conversation around restricting usage, such as, we see people betting on a particular day of the month, so they probably get their paycheck the week before, so we should send them a bunch of messages reminding them to bet based on that trend. So I was wondering if you could speak to the conversation around restrictions such as that.
Sure. So I've never thought of it as target this person because they're getting their paycheck tomorrow, but we certainly look at trends in data to try to optimize for our business. I think they usually are more a combination of event-based. Obviously, Sunday is a big day. Sunday at 12 is the busiest time. I'll point out, and as we're talking about responsible gaming, as you're talking about someone getting their paycheck, I just want to dispel the notion that as an operator, you just want to take all of someone's money. There's no real value to us to have someone lose their house playing on our site. Again, there's our handle, our revenue is 5% of that. We don't want 5% of someone's life for them to be miserable. We want users who come back and enjoy and play repeatedly. So there's no advantage to the business really to put people in a position where they are no longer able to play. That's not what we do, and so I think it's a fair question, but we have a strong amount of responsible play controls in place, designed to look at patterns of people's behavior that could be a red flag. But otherwise, in terms of looking for behavior to encourage betting, it's more about optimizing around events that we know people like to play.
Over here, Michael?
Yeah, so you had said that the integrity fee might be deserved because the NBA is supplying the product that's being wagered on, but in the prop market, you could possibly argue that, like, last night, if Jason Tatum had 20 points, that was partially his product that he put onto the table if I bet on that proposition. So why do the players not deserve the integrity fee if the prop market exists? Or even you could extend it to, like, the Super Bowl anthem taking longer than a certain amount of time. Does that singer deserve a fee for creating that product? So with such a varied betting market, why do only the leagues deserve the integrity fee?
I used the word league as a shorthand for the league and its players. The way our system works is revenue that comes into the league is shared 50-50 with our players. And so here, if we were to receive a fee on a royalty basis for this activity, the players would get half of it.
Isn't it in the CBA already? The BRI includes gambling revenue?
Correct.
I've never had a law student who said, I should tithe to you because you taught me procedure.
Thank you. On that topic about the salary cap, so the salary cap is a function of the BRI, and taking into account the floodgates opening with gambling, do you foresee the salary cap going up and steady spikes through the next few years, or do you foresee a huge spike in the salary cap?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't foresee that, and I don't foresee it because while there is nonstop attention and conversation about this topic, I actually believe this is going to be a slow build in terms of the number of states that come online and how they come online over time. I mean, we've got 8 states that have legalized. 6 of 8 are operational right now. I mean, you could have different predictions for where it's going to be. I would sort of say by the end of this season, we'd be at 15. I mean, there are some states where this is super complicated. Take California as an example, where the Indian tribes have come out publicly and said that based on compacts entered into 100 years ago, that all of this revenue is theirs. So they're going to have to fight that out with the state. They're going to have a constitutional amendment. There's an awful lot that's going to have to go on for some of these states to actually legalize this. And my prediction is that will all happen in kind of a ramped way where it just comes in, it builds pretty slowly over time. And then, of course, the other piece of it is the league revenue, to your point about building our BRI base. I mean, that's going to be dependent upon what kind of revenue we're receiving. If we end up being successful in some of our lobbying efforts and getting a royalty fee as a legal matter, that will change the revenue posture and move things in one direction. If it's only commercial deals that we're making, it'll be different. So the short answer is I don't see a big spike coming in. I'd be happy to be wrong, but I sort of see it sort of building in slowly.
Could I also add something to the question about what are the players' interests here? So there's already been talk amongst the players' unions that they have a right of publicity interest, and that there may be a spate of new litigation in the intellectual property space where players, and perhaps even the leagues, argue that for yet another way that they should be able to monetize sports gambling, to the extent that the sports books and their partners are using league intellectual property visibly to market their product.
And when you talk about the monetization, it works both ways. The operators are monetizing not just from the revenue they're making from sports wagering. It becomes an amenity for all the sorts of other forms of financial benefits they're going to receive from that actual event, whether it's a casino or a racetrack or even a mobile site. There's other forms of financial benefits they can receive. And they're kept very close to the chest. And I'd say the same thing is with the leagues. there's other forms of financial benefits that are clearly in play here, and you've heard Mark Cuban say that, you know, thank you very much, Supreme Court, my value, my team just doubled. And then you have advertising money, and you have sponsorships, and you have more people engaged in watching your event, so therefore the future advertising dollars coming to the leagues may go up. Now, it's all hypothetical, and we can't pinpoint it, but I think we have to be honest that there are multiple forms of monetization here for both the operators and the leagues. Hesitancy to share that information and make it public, and the only thing we're really focused on now when we argue in the states are the two issues that the leagues presented. They want an integrity fee or a royalty fee. Let's call it a royalty fee now. Integrity fee was just a very bad advertising part on there. Royalty fee, direct payment, mandated by law, where they get a share of the money that's gambled, or this concept of pay us for our data, and that you can't take wagers on our events unless you use our, quote, official data. And that has to be mandated by law. Now, the NBA, as you can see, has gone a different route, and that is to have traditional commercial setting negotiated so that between the operator and the league, they make an arrangement whereby they can each have a benefit. So most of the states that have commented on these two issues, the direct monetization, and basically the legislatures are just reacting very negatively, saying, we're not paying you anything. You should be paying us. And it gets very ugly and very nasty. And the focus is on those two issues when there's a lot other financial forms of benefits for all parties, and people just don't want to focus on those difficult questions.
Right, so just on that last point, so we're not asking the states to pay us anything. So it's not the states that are unhappy, it's operators that would be paying this royalty fee that we're talking about, so just so we identify correctly the parties that are at issue here.
Well, we've hit the magic hour, and you can see that there's an enormous amount of legal work waiting for you to graduate and take care of. So you can see any of these people, even Jody, in terms of future employment. My thanks to the panel. It was good of them to come and share their experience.